Saturdays is usually manure day. That's the day where I usually shuck stalls and clean cages and coops.
This is episode 32, and we were talking about if there should be a congressional stock trading ban, the U.S. government's strategy for cryptocurrencies, and a lightning round at the end. The American public is again becoming increasingly concerned that members of Congress are placing stock transactions using private information not known to the investing public. While there are some policies in place to prevent insider trading by congressional members, Dave Leventhal from the Business Insider reports that at least 55 members of Congress violated these policies in 2021. There has also been reports that federal judges have unlawfully ruled in cases involving companies in which they or their families held shares. Do you think congressional members and federal justices should be prohibited from placing stock transactions while in office? Alex.
I'm going to go with absolutely. If we're going to be putting people like Martha Stewart in jail, then all of these people should definitely be in jail for doing the exact same thing or worse. It kind of reminds me of what happened right before the COVID crash. In 2021, we had a bunch of closed-door hearings by some Senate committees. It turns out about a dozen or so senators sold out of everything they had about a week before the market tanked. Clearly, I mean, it's no real difference between this and other forms of insider trading. You know, the information is not public. They knew what was going to happen and acted accordingly. Hard to blame them, but at the same time, if you're not going to tell the general investing public about it, then how is it not insider trading? Other thing I remember is the huge temper tantrums that everybody on the left side of the aisle threw about Donald Trump and his blind trust and whether or not it was good enough or not. If Donald Trump should have to put everything in a blind trust, I have no problem at all with every elected official and high-ranking bureaucrat and judge having to do the exact same thing. So, yeah, again, absolutely, I think so.
Drew?
I'm kind of in the middle between completely banning stock trading for congressional members and granting total stock trading freedom for congressional members. So I guess in that sense, I'm sort of between Nancy Pelosi and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which are probably not the most desirable figures to be flanked from. But anyway, I guess where I stand is I'm in fan of a more stricter version of the 2012 Stock Trading Act. Basically, the 2012 Stock Trading Act was a joke. It places a $200 fine and it gives you a 30 to 45 day disclosure window, which I think are way too lenient and rife for abuse. If you're an insider of a company, basically you have to disclose your trades within 2 days of making a buy or sell. If you don't, you're probably going to be investigated. And if it's found that you were acting on material, non-public information, then you're going to go to prison. So I like to see congressional members be held to the same scrutiny as the citizens that have the same access to that kind of information. Now, one of the great things about our market system is we go to extremely great lengths to make it fair. Now, I still get frustrated with all the different regulations from time to time, but I'd much prefer our game and our set of rules compared to other corrupt societies. So if we don't want to give our elected officials enough rope to hang themselves with, then I think we ought to have stricter stock trading rules and make sure that they're enforced. Alex mentioned something about placing them in blind trusts. That's certainly a good option on paper, I think. But even with blind trusts, the truster can still control the trust. If it's a revocable trust, they can basically set the rules. They can pick their trustees. On paper, it looks like they're not making any bad moves, but they can still control it. So I'm not even a fan of blind trusts.
It always amazes me how naive we are as Americans that we actually expect that elected officials would actually act with virtue, that somehow that they become angels once they get to government. With the amount of passion that Alex expressed his point of view just demonstrates how we have higher expectations of our elected officials than they actually can represent us. Other countries, why would anybody run for office unless you could use your position to get wealthy? I mean, that's the whole reason why you run for office, right? But in America, we don't believe that. We believe that people go to Washington to do great and wonderful things for their constituency. It's a sad state of affairs when we have to even concern ourselves with whether federal judges will rule in favor of their stock portfolios when they watch cases, or that our congressmen and senators would use this information to fatten their purses. It actually happens. I think that if you're a federal employee, which you kind of are when you're an elected official, you should be expected to follow certain codes of ethics. Just like as certified financial planners, we have to work at a higher standard, or investment advisors, or even stockbrokers. We're expected to follow a code of ethics. And if they can't do it voluntarily, then I think these employees of the American people should be required to do so. So I support some sort of heavy hand on elected officials, because it's like in the military. Military officers don't cheat at cards. It's like asking the question, should we allow military officers to cheat at cards? Well, no, because they're officers. They should be able to act like officers. Well, elected officials should be held to a higher standard, and if they want on their own, we should make them.
Yeah, the 2012 Stock Act, in my opinion, wasn't a complete waste of time, because what it did is that it made insider trading for congressional members illegal. So like what Alex brought up is that, Martha Stewart went to prison for insider trading. Before 2012, it was perfectly legal if you were a member of Congress to sit on the defense committee and then trade defense stocks based on what you heard in your morning briefing. So the 2012 Stock Act did a good job of, number one, making insider trading illegal for congressional members, and then, but Drew's right, is that penalties currently for not disclosing regulations per the 2012 Stock Act is a measly $200 for a lot of people. A $200 fine is almost worth paying if you can set your portfolio up and make more than that. So yeah, I mean, they need to go farther with the 2012 Stock Act, and then you get to the question whether they should ban them altogether. I just honestly, I think they should just do a better job of disclosing what they're trading, and because like right now, I think for the most part, they just leave it open-ended and say that you should disclose it as soon as possible. But when I go on to like housewatch.com or senatewatch.com, the most recent trade I can see is in February 22nd, which is still pretty old if you're disclosing stock trades. So, and then some of these, when I go and look at some of these other ones, it's been 90, at least 90 days for other people to disclose these trades, and as long as 16 months for other congressional members to disclose their trades. So, sure, if you want to trade stocks, go ahead, but I mean, you should have to disclose these trades almost immediately if you're going to do it, because the basis of insider trading is that you have information that everybody doesn't, and then you make money on it. And if it's going to be illegal for it in the private sector, it should be illegal for members of Congress. So go ahead. So if they want to be able to trade stocks, then they need to disclose their positions immediately. Or what they can do is just basically put their money into essentially the TSP program that the government provides, where all you can buy is the C fund, the S fund, the I fund, and that's basically what you have while you're a public servant. So
I kind of like the idea of just putting it in the government funds, but I don't like completely stripping them of their freedoms of being able to trade. I think people have to make a living. They have the right to make trades, and if we did that, then the only people that would get elected are people that have the means to live without doing this. So I don't want to limit the pool of our possible politicians.
I wouldn't limit these restrictions to just stock trades. I'd do all sorts of transactions. I guess I totally disagree with Drew in this one, in that when I was a scoutmaster and when we go on camping trips, the boys would make every meal ramen based, because all you have to do is add hot water. And my goal was to teach the boys how to cook much more sophisticated than just ramen noodles for all of their meals. So I came up with a rule that you could only use a ramen-based meal for one of the meals we're eating on a camping trip. So every meal was now oatmeal-based, because they just shifted from adding water to ramen noodles, adding water to ramen-based. If we come up with a really prohibitive stock transaction regulation, they'll just switch to real estate. or they'll switch to private equity, or they'll just switch. It's one of those things where I hold my elected officials to a much higher standard than the current ones that they're operating voluntarily. If they're going to use their position to, it really is a zero-sum game. And that's the whole reason why we outlaw insider trading, is because it is a zero-sum game. If everybody knows ahead of time, if only a few people know ahead of time, then they profit from the lack of information for everybody else. So I would be extremely restrictive. If you're going to Washington to get rich, then we don't need you.
I agree completely. I would say, first of all, I'm not married to the idea of the blind trust. I was just using that particular example with all the people that are now, like Nancy Pelosi, very against any restrictions on stock trading, was leading the vanguard about how Donald Trump was when it came to his investments in office. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you are going to go to Washington to get rich, what do we need you for? You're supposed to be going there to represent us. I have no illusions about what actually happens. Our elected officials are usually the best glad handers and not the smartest people. But if, like I said before, at the very least, they should be held to the exact same standards as the rest of the American people. So I would really favor a zero tolerance policy for this kind of thing. And I would even go so far as to say that, like, even businesses of close family members, like Nancy Pelosi's husband has made billions of dollars on government contracts. That should be illegal too, but that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah, treat it like the citizens. Hold them to the same accountability. If it shows that you were acting on insider information, using your powers, get thrown in prison. I mean, who was it? Chris Collins. Yeah. He got investigated, and it turns out he was acting on non-public information. He just resigned and then just went about his life. Throw him in jail. Just make the penalties really high, to the point where it's probably not in their best interest to do it.
I'll take one last shot at the blind trust in that. Just because one of the facts that I point out to people is that when money goes into the blind trust, is you still know what stocks you held before it went into the trust. So if you had a bunch of defense stocks in there, you still know you have defense stocks in there. And as long as whoever manages didn't just sell everything, you have a vested interest in defense stocks. So
yeah, so it's not the amnesia trust.
I kind of like your idea, Tom, is that any additional investing that takes place while you're in office is in a thrift savings plan sort of a venue, because theoretically, at least, whatever they're investing in, the rest of us have the same opportunity.
On Wednesday, President Joe Biden signed an executive order directing the government to assess the risk and benefits of creating a digital dollar, and to also assess issues raised by cryptocurrencies, including systematic risk and consumer protection, potentially paving the way for a more wide-ranging oversight of the cryptocurrency market. What kind of risk do you think digital currencies pose to the public, and do you think the government should regulate this market?
Well, I'll start off here. I think the best historical analog might be the wildcat banking era in the United States, between the 1820s and 1860s, roughly. There was no national bank, no single issued currency, so local banks, even railroads, were issuing their own money. Oftentimes, these were just totally worthless, backed by absolutely nothing. One of the worst examples was there was something like tens of thousands of dollars in liabilities, and the bank had $50-something on hand to redeem these otherwise totally worthless banknotes for. And I think that's, in many ways, what a lot of cryptocurrencies, not all of them, are kind of analogous to. It doesn't take much effort or time or money to start your own cryptocurrency backed by absolutely nothing. And so to me, there's kind of a fine line between protecting the American people from an obvious scam and trying to protect people just from themselves. A lot of these cryptocurrencies, they have some ridiculous ones. Dogecoin, I mean, if there's ever been a pump and dump scheme, that has to be it. They have one, literally, censor this if you have to, called diarrhea coin. Absolutely worthless. No real world use whatsoever. And yet, people trade it. To an extent, again, buyer beware. But at a certain point, when do you put a stop to these clear, obvious pump and dump schemes? The legislation involved gets kind of complicated. It is illegal for people to make a currency and try and pass it off as either a U.S. currency, foreign currency, or even a new currency of your own design. That's 18 U.S.C. 486, Section 486. But the courts have been kind of weird about it. Like the Liberty Dollar, the guy who created that went to prison. But you have these other currencies that exist in local communities that nobody does anything about. So whether they should, I think if it's an obvious scam, yeah, probably should be regulated. Other things that might have more real world use, I would say leave them alone.
I don't place a whole lot of confidence in how the government regulates our current currency. They turn a perfectly good gold-backed currency into a fiat currency that's basically propped up on nothing but the faith of the people that use it. So they already screwed the pooch. I don't see how giving them another thing to ruin is a good idea. However, if the Fed is going to control whatever kind of currency we have, then I actually kind of like the idea of it being a cryptocurrency. I'm not arguing my life on this. I'm still kind of wrapping my head around the whole thing. But in a weird way, it's sort of a transition in the right direction. We'd go from a fiat currency to a currency that's scarce and held on a blockchain. There's certainly a lot of issues with transitioning our national currency to crypto. But in theory, I could see it being a viable option.
I guess my first question is, who are they protecting? They make it sound like they have to come in on their white horse and save us from ourselves. But quite frankly, over the last 4 years, I've watched how they've managed the currency we currently are issued by them. And I've seen that now it takes twice as much of their currency to buy the same house you could have bought 3 years ago. To Drew's point, I don't trust the federal government's capabilities to regulate anything. The reality is that whoever has access to government is going to get the protection. But I think Joe Sixpack Citizen, he can't expect much from this study to protect him and his net worth. So as always, the best course of action is spread your assets out. Don't put it all in any particular currency or investment or sector of the economy, because you never know who's going to have extra access to the government at your expense.
So this is where like the idea of crypto starts to rub against like the grain of the U.S. government, because essentially, because the idea here is that right now the U.S. enjoys a lot of power over the SWIFT system, and they can regulate a lot of where money goes because of that system. And if you start using Bitcoin and you start having like a third-party currency, you lose a lot of that power to like impose sanctions and to monitor where money's flowing in the world for your from your where money's going, and to block your foreign adversaries from spending their own money or their U.S. dollars in the world. So if you have a third party that you don't have access to, you lose the power to do that. And so I think what the government's doing right now is trying to figure out a way for them to continue to enjoy the power that they have with the SWIFT system in the cryptocurrency world. And they can certainly do that with a US digital dollar. But when you create the digital dollar, you basically lose the premise of what Bitcoin and Ethereum were based on, in that there's no one central governing body controlling the currency. So this is where, and this is a big talking point in cryptocurrency for me, is because if you want like Bitcoin, Ethereum to survive, they're going to have to coexist with governments. And right now, the governments are like, well, we're going to make our own digital currency. It's like, great, make your own currency, but that it defeats the purpose of why Bitcoin was created in the first place, is so that the government wouldn't have access to where the world's money's flowing, or one government wouldn't have access to where the world's money's flowing in the first place. It creates, it resolves some problems, like people who don't, who they call like unbanked citizens or whatever, who don't have actual bank accounts. it creates a way for them to spend money when they don't have a bank account to create transactions for, which is good. But it sounds like, from what I can see, is that, crypto, or excuse me, like Bitcoin, can solve that problem. Ethereum can solve that problem. Literally any other cryptocurrency. But I think what they're trying to assess is, how are they going to protect the United States national interest if people are using, like Bitcoin? And that's kind of what's going on with the Russians right now, is that they've assessed, now that they've blocked Russia from the SWIFT system, they think a lot of their oligarchs are dumping money into Bitcoin to bypass the SWIFT system. And from what I've read is that unless you're in Venezuela or you're going to buy a Tesla, there's not a whole lot you can buy with Bitcoin at this point. You can't use it in China because they outright banned it. So, and I think India did it as well. So at this point, I don't think oligarchs are using it to skirt the SWIFT system, but at some point, if Ethereum or Bitcoin does become an actual competitor to the dollar, then they are going to be able to do this, and the U.S. is going to lose a powerful advantage it has over their adversaries.
Well, on that note, it was Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives the U.S. Congress authority to regulate the value of not just the U.S. dollar or whatever currency we use, but every other currency used in the United States. A simple solution would be you peg the value of whatever cryptocurrency you want to the digital dollar and declare victory. Essentially forcing everything to become what they call stable coins. So even still, that's, other currencies are out there, but and whether or not they'll tolerate it, I don't know. We'll see. My guess is no, though.
Right. I guess my overarching concern is that the government wants to be able to track flows of money, and it becomes increasingly harder to do that with Bitcoin, even though in some cases, like they held up like some power plant or something like that, they were actually able to get in and follow the flow of money to that. But as the government becomes better at tracking it through like a blockchain, then it becomes, then the idea around Bitcoin becomes, less solid. It becomes less of what it was originally created for. It was. Well,
I don't mean to keep going on, but we already know that governments know how to track anything on the blockchain, because they were seizing people's digital assets in Canada because of the trucker protests. And the only way they could do that is to know whose wallet is whose and who transferred it. They know how to read the blockchain. So they, quote unquote, there is no anonymity. They know it, whether the back doors were built in or they just figured out how to crack the code, so to speak. It's not anonymous. I don't think most people paid attention to that, but if you saw what was going on with those Canadian trucker protests and the people who ended up getting arrested and their assets seized, you'll know that they know how to find out who's doing what on the Bitcoin blockchain.
If what you two gentlemen say is true, then maybe we have seen the end of Bitcoin continuing to grow like it has in terms of value.
Maybe.
That if it starts acting like a real currency that can be traced by governments, it's going to stop being attractive to investors who think this might be a way to cover up their financial transactions. So its value will eventually reduce to the point where it's nothing more than a currency as opposed to a trading mechanism.
Maybe is that, when you talk to people in the cryptocurrency, they're excited that Bitcoin is legitimate enough to be, have this much research done by the federal government. So there was, in fact, like the Joe Biden's announcement, which actually leaked a little bit early, actually pumped Bitcoin up to around $41,000 per coin or whatever it was, because they view this as it being more legitimate. But I think there's a little bit of conflict and interest in there, depending on what you want to use cryptocurrency for. But we'll move on because we're running out of time. All right, so for the lightning round today, we got 3 questions. First one is that many successful CEOs and investors say that the weekends are key to being successful for the upcoming week. Specifically, some CEOs completely take Saturdays off, while others use that as time to reflect on the past week. Alex, how do you spend your Saturday?
Well, now that it's getting a little warmer out, that's changed things a little bit. Usually we wake up when Alma does, which is around 7 or 8 these days. Make some coffee, grab some breakfast, and then typically hang out for a little while. And then if the weather's nice, we'll take on to the park or maybe go for a hike. That's a pretty typical Saturday these days.
My Saturdays always start off with a run or a big breakfast in no particular order.
My house, it's never Christmas until the animals are fed, but Saturdays is usually manure day. That's the day where I usually shuck stalls and clean cages and coops.
We just go get a cup of coffee in the morning, and that's been and then we go the day from there, just so we're not sitting around and people are fighting with each other and stuff like that. So I like to get out of the house, do something that's enjoyable for me, and the kids seem to like it too. Give my wife a break, and that's kind of how we spend our Saturday mornings at least. Some people tend to spend their weekends sitting in coffee shops, like me. So obviously this was a lead into the second question. While you may not be one of these people, do you prefer local coffee shops, or do you prefer coffee from national shops and brands? Which do you prefer, Alex?
Right now, local. So either it's harder to get down to the Fieldhead shop, but they make really great coffee. Otherwise, go to Coffee Traders or go somewhere that serves one of them. So yeah, local usually.
I don't really care either way. I don't do it for moral reasons, I guess, but I like the taste of the Grizzly Blend in Rising Wolf Montana Coffee Trader. So those are the beans that I make at home.
Drinking coffee stunts your growth, and I'm not old enough to drink coffee, so I abstain from the devil's juice.
I'm 5'6", so it doesn't matter anyways, but I'll agree with Drew is that I don't really care. Like, I'll drink Starbucks or whatever, but the Glacier Blend at Coffee Traders has been my favorite for a while, and I like their shops are big enough where I can kind of spread my kids out at a table. So yeah, so I like the local coffee shops right now, but I'm not super picky. All right, last week we talked about how you eat your pizza revealed certain personality traits. I found another study this week which shows that how you take your coffee may reveal other characteristics about your personality. So, Alex, why don't you start us off? Why don't you tell us, how do you take your coffee?
So almost any brewing method that I do is going to end up black with some sugar. Occasionally I'll do a mocha pot, so a Bialetti, and that's heavy cream and sugar, but generally black with sugar.
Drip coffee or French press or pour over, I do black, unadulterated. If I'm drinking espresso, I'll make it an espresso macchiato.
You have to be short and old to drink coffee, so I have nothing to add to this conversation.
Okay. Well, so recently, I've been drinking decaf, and I've been increasingly more drinking it black. So for black coffee drinkers, these folks, according to this article, tend to be patient, efficient, and appreciative of simplicity. They're also given to abruptness and moodiness and set in their ways. I will say is that there's a separate article for decaf drinkers, and these people are most likely to be health conscious, but then it lists mostly other negative traits, such as they tend to be worriers, perfectionists, control freaks, who are sensitive and hyper concerned with with various rules. So I'm not sure that particularly defines me to a T, but I'll go with the health. I'll adopt the health conscious trait. But yeah, I don't know. So so that's what it says about black coffee drinkers. It did not address hybrid coffee drinkers or people that did not drink coffee.
Yeah, Dad, I don't think you have any personality traits.
Yeah, you're dead compared to this article. Yeah. All right, well, that's it for Farm to Market's episode 32. We'll see you next week.